there's other elements of existentialism that I think are extremely interesting. For example, the definition of truth in existentialism is different than the definition of truth that might be characteristic of objective materialism. So truths that are truths from the perspective of objective materialism are scientific truths, and they're usually descriptive truths. And so the truth claims of science go something like this: I'll undertake a procedure, which I'll tell you about, and I'll observe the outcomes. And then if you undertake that procedure, and you observe the outcomes, and the outcomes are the same, you know, and we'll do this maybe 100 times, just to be certain, then we'll assume that what that outcome is real. So, it's a definition of a procedure, that's the experiment that elicits the outcome, and then the demonstration that the outcome is constant across observers. So that's a lovely definition of truth, and it obviously has extreme utility, partly because it helps you separate subjective fantasy, which is a form of reality, from other forms of realities. So another form of reality would be collectively apprehensible reality. You don't want to confuse those two things. In fact, that's actually a sign of, if not naivety and a state of undeveloped differentiation, it can also be a sign of insanity, because one of the things, say, that characterizes schizophrenics is they can't tell the difference between what only they experience and what everybody else experiences. So the scientific definition of truth is a perfectly reasonable definition, but it's not the existential definition of truth. The existential definition of truth is more action predicated. So for the existentialist, truth is a way of being. It's not a collection of descriptions. So it's more embodied, you know, from the Piagetian point of view. And so truth is reflected in what you act. So Nietzsche would say, for example, it doesn't matter what you say. It matters what you do. And if I want to figure out what you believe, I don't ask you. I watch how you act. And I assume that your true beliefs are those that are directing your actions. And so truth is discovered in action. And that's a very different claim, you know, and it's not the claim of a passive observer. It's the claim of someone who's actively interacting with the world. And of course, we're always acting interactively with the world. And not only that, if we don't act interactively with the world, we cease to exist. So we have to do that merely to maintain ourselves. And so the existential claim would be, given that's in our essential nature, there are ways that you can act that are they're improper. And technically, it's like, for example, let's say you want A. And then you act in a bunch of ways that makes it absolutely impossible that you will get A. It's like an existentialist would say, well, there's something wrong with that schema. Like it's not necessarily immoral, because that would only be if you were willfully blind to it, but they would certainly say, well, it's got this self-contradictory element that makes it wrong. So insofar, it's like this, insofar as you're acting towards an aim. You want something. And then insofar as you want something, the fact that you want it constitutes the framework within which you evaluate the utility and truth of your actions, right? So it's like you come up with a theory of truth just because you're doing something, and the theory is A, that what you want is acceptable to want, and you know, that can be true or not, but it doesn't matter, you just assume that, and B, that those things that will get you to that end are appropriate. You can't get out of that if you're doing something. You're making a claim about the structure of the world and what constitutes appropriate action as soon as you make any action. You can't get out of that. Nietzsche said, "Can one live it? All truths are bloody truths to me." And that's one of the things I really like about reading the existentialists too. It's not, there's no abstract disembodiment in their philosophy. You see that the people who are writing as existentialists are committed to what they say. They want to enact what they say in the world. It's romantic because it does involve emotions and motivation. See, with reason alone, Enlightenment view of reason was that reason and the passions were antagonistic, that all the passions could do would be to cloud reason, and that it was reason's job to lift itself up above the body and the emotions and clarify the nature of the world. The existentialists would deny that completely. They would say, no, 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 it's that the purpose, the appropriate mode of being is to act properly. And rationality can be a guide to that, but it can also deceive in all sorts of ways. The passions inform you. They don't cloud your reasoning, although of course they can, because they tend to be kind of single-minded, you know, they can take you off course. But that doesn't mean that they're enemies of rational clarity per se. And when the existentialists write, you can tell they put their whole being into it, so it's gripping and passionate.